She's just a soccer mom playing warrior. The words cut through the dojo like a blade through silk. The blonde woman in worn training gear froze mid-bow, 30 pairs of eyes suddenly fixed on her trembling hands. Her knuckles were white against the frayed belt, but something else lingered beneath the surface. What happens when someone mistakes a sleeping dragon for a house cat? When mockery meets a force that could destroy everything in its path? In this traditional martial arts school, respect is everything. Lose it, and you're nothing. But what if the person they're humiliating has already lost everything that mattered? They thought they knew her story. Divorced mother, weekend warrior, desperate to belong. They had no idea they were about to witness the resurrection of a legend who'd been buried so deep, even she'd forgotten who she used to be. But legends don't stay buried forever. Thunder Mountain Traditional Martial Arts Academy stood like a fortress against the Colorado morning. Ancient Japanese aesthetics dominated the space, polished wooden floors that had absorbed decades of sweat and dedication, ceremonial weapons displayed with reverence on dark walls, and a clear hierarchy visible in how students arranged themselves by belt rankings. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the training floor, while the sounds of controlled grunts, wood striking pads, and respectful high responses echoed through the sacred space. Sarah Chen kept to the back rows, a 34-year-old blonde woman who seemed determined to disappear into the white gi that hung loosely on her 5'6" frame. Her movements carried an unconscious precision that trained eyes might notice. The way she shifted her weight without thinking, how her breathing remained steady during the most intense drills, but she avoided eye contact, kept her head down, and moved with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned that being invisible was sometimes the only way to survive. Marcus Tank Williams commanded the front of the room like a general surveying his troops. 28 years old, muscles barely contained by his black gi, his second-degree black belt a symbol of authority he wore like a crown. He surrounded himself with younger male students who hung on his every word, laughing at his jokes that barely masked casual sexism as traditional values. To Marcus, women in martial arts were curiosities at best, inferior practitioners who needed extra guidance and lower expectations. The dojo's hierarchy was absolute. Sensei David Nakamura, a man in his 60s whose weathered face spoke of decades of discipline, demanded respect through presence alone. Senior students demonstrated techniques while newer ones watched in silence, learning their place in the ancient order. The gender divide was subtle but unmistakable. Men pushed to excel, women encouraged to simply participate. But Sarah carried secrets in her muscle memory. When she thought no one was watching, her stance would shift to perfect form, a transformation so subtle yet profound it was like watching a house cat suddenly reveal tiger stripes. She winced during demonstrations, not from difficulty, but from witnessing poor technique that her body instinctively wanted to correct. Her eyes automatically assessed exits, calculated distances, cataloged potential threats. When a student stumbled during practice, she moved to help, then caught herself, retreating back to her self-imposed shadows. Partner sparring assignments, Marcus announced, his voice cutting through the morning's routine. His eyes found Sarah with predatory satisfaction. "Chen, you're with Morrison." Jake Morrison, 19 years old with more confidence than skill, cracked his knuckles and grinned. The assignment was deliberate, pairing the soccer mom with the most aggressive young student. Marcus's smirk spread as he added, "Let's see what our weekend warrior can do against real training." Snickers rippled through the male students while the women shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the setup but too intimidated to speak. Sarah's internal battle played across her features for just a moment, flashes of memory like lightning strikes, hospital lights too bright, a funeral where she couldn't cry, a child's voice asking where Daddy went. She had come here to heal, to find something of herself in the controlled violence, not to fight, never to really fight again. Her gym bag sat innocuously in the corner, but a careful observer might notice the worn hand wraps peeking out, the edge of an old trophy quickly hidden beneath a towel. Her phone background showed a young daughter, Emma, her reason for staying invisible, for choosing suburbs over octagons. The scars on her knuckles told stories that didn't match the soccer mom narrative. each mark a chapter in a book she'd slammed shut 5 years ago. Sensei Nakamura watched Sarah with an intensity that suggested recognition dawning like a slow sunrise. On the wall behind him, championship photos displayed the Academy's proudest moments, though one frame seemed deliberately turned, its contents obscured. The heavy bag in the corner showed recent damage, the kind that came from expert-level training, strikes that knew exactly where to land for maximum impact. Traditional martial arts isn't about participation trophies, Marcus announced to the room, though his eyes stayed on Sarah. It's about earning your place through pain and dedication. Jake bounced on his toes, eager to prove himself. Maybe she should try yoga instead, might be more her speed. Sarah remained silent, but her jaw tightened imperceptibly, a micro-expression that transformed her face for just an instant. Sensei Nakamura's voice cut through the growing tension. Respect is earned through action, not words. Perhaps today we'll see what actions reveal. Sarah removed her hoodie with deliberate slowness, revealing shoulders and arms more defined than her loose gi suggested. She stepped onto the mat with a fluidity that made Nakamura's eyes narrow, not the hesitant shuffle of a beginner, but the glide of someone who had lived their life measured in 8-foot squares. Her hands formed a guard position so perfect it looked like muscle memory had betrayed her conscious mind. Marcus's grin widened, mistaking revelation for vulnerability. What if we made this interesting? Jake, show our soccer mom what real martial arts looks like. The room held its breath. Sarah stood in the center of the mat, trembling not with fear, but with the effort of keeping something buried. The sleeping giant had been poked, and everyone was about to learn that some people don't need to announce their arrival. They just need to be provoked enough to remember who they used to be. Jake Morrison strutted onto the mat like a peacock displaying its feathers, performing an elaborate warm-up routine designed more for Instagram than combat. His theatrical shadowboxing drew approving nods from his fellow male students, while Marcus announced with barely concealed amusement, "Gentle contact only, everyone. Wouldn't want to hurt our soccer mom on her first real sparring session." The laughter that followed was sharp enough to cut, and several students already had their phones out, recording what they expected to be entertainment at Sarah's expense. She bowed deeply, respectfully, the kind of bow that spoke of years of tradition. Jake barely dipped his head in return, his dismissive gesture earning another round of chuckles from the peanut gallery. "Come on, at least try to hit me," Jake taunted, throwing a lazy jab that a child could have avoided. Sarah sidestepped with economy of movement, no wasted energy, no flourish. Just absence where his fist expected resistance. His follow-up was equally sluggish, and again she simply wasn't there, moving with a fluidity that seemed almost accidental. Marcus's voice boomed across the dojo. "Maybe we should get her some training wheels, or better yet, some protective gear for our star fighter here." The sarcasm dripped like poison while his loyal followers laughed on cue. The female students looked increasingly uncomfortable, recognizing bullying dressed up as instruction, but none dared speak against the established order. Jake's frustration mounted with each missed strike. Sarah absorbed the few glancing blows that connected without flinching, her defensive movements too smooth, too practiced to be beginner's luck. Her breathing never changed, staying controlled and measured, while Jake's grew ragged with exertion and embarrassment. Her eyes, those were what should have warned him. They weren't the panicked eyes of prey. They were calculating, measuring, waiting. Then Jake crossed the line that would change everything. "No wonder your husband left you," he spat, throwing a wilder punch fueled by humiliation. Probably couldn't stand being married to someone so pathetic. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Sarah's composure cracked for just a fraction of a second, something dark and dangerous flashing across her features before she locked it down. But damage was done. The cage door had been rattled. Marcus, sensing blood in the water, piled on. "That's enough therapy session, Morrison. Real fighters don't need safe spaces. They need to learn through experience." He nodded at Jake. "Show her what that means." Jake loaded up a haymaker, telegraphing it like a Western Union message. This time, Sarah's response was different. Her counter wasn't the hesitant movement of a soccer mom. It was lightning given form. A strike so fast several students missed it entirely. The sound of impact was crisp, definitive. Jake hit the mat hard, his eyes wide with shock, the air driven from his lungs in a whoosh that echoed through the suddenly silent dojo. Sarah's stance had transformed completely. Where before stood a woman trying to disappear, now stood a predator in human form. Her weight distributed perfectly, hands positioned not in basic guard but in something far more sophisticated, something that spoke of years of refinement. The soccer mom was gone. In her place stood something that made the hair on the back of necks stand up. The phones kept recording, but now they captured something entirely different. The male students exchanged confused glances, their laughter dying in their throats. Marcus's expression shifted from amusement to concern as he watched Sarah help Jake to his feet with the same controlled precision she'd used to put him there. "Lucky shot," Marcus declared, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "Do it again. Anyone can get lucky once." Sarah shook her head, already trying to retreat, to stuff the genie back in the bottle, but Jake's ego was as bruised as his ribs. He charged with the reckless abandon of wounded pride. No technique, just rage and humiliation given physical form. This time, Sarah's muscle memory took complete control. The takedown was artwork in motion. His momentum redirected, his balance destroyed, his body controlled and deposited on the mat with surgical precision. Before he could process what had happened, she had him in a submission hold, applied and released in the span of heartbeats. Jake's frantic tapping was unnecessary. She had already let go, standing with the kind of fluid grace that took years to develop. And then Aurora let go. The dojo was tomb silent except for Jake's labored breathing. Students formed a circle without being asked, sensing they were witnessing something significant, something that would be talked about in whispers for years to come. Marcus's wounded pride couldn't let this stand. "Cute tricks," he said, removing his instructor's jacket with deliberate slowness. "Let's see how you handle real pressure. Educational purposes," he added with a glance at Sensei Nakamura. "Sometimes students need to see the difference between luck and skill." Sensei Nakamura stepped forward slightly. "Marcus, perhaps that's enough for today's lesson." But Marcus was already on the mat, his ego demanding satisfaction. "Just showing proper technique, Sensei. Someone needs to..." Nakamura's eyes never left Sarah, studying her with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. The pieces were falling into place, the perfect form, the controlled violence, the technique that shouldn't exist in a suburban dojo. Sarah's eyes met his, pleading silently for him to stop this before it went too far. Marcus assumed his fighting stance, flexing for his audience, still playing to the crowd that was no longer laughing. Sarah reluctantly took position, and the transformation was complete. Her footwork was textbook perfect. No, beyond textbook. This was the kind of movement that textbooks were written about. The crowd pressed closer, sensing they were about to witness something that would shatter their understanding of the hierarchy they'd accepted as absolute. Marcus threw a combination that would have overwhelmed most students. Sarah slipped each punch like water flowing around stones, her counters minimal but devastatingly precise. He stumbled, suddenly off balance in more ways than one. Her expression had changed, the warmth gone, replaced by something cold and professional. And Marcus swung wildly in frustration. Sarah caught his arm mid-strike. The joint lock she applied was surgical in its precision, a technique so refined it had a name. Marcus dropped to one knee, his face contorting in pain and shock. Sarah held the position just long enough to make her point, applying pressure without causing permanent damage. The mark of true mastery. That's when Sensei Nakamura spoke the words that would change everything. "That's the Chen lock," he said, his voice carrying across the silent dojo. "Only one fighter ever perfected that technique. Only one fighter had the flexibility and precision to make it look that effortless." Sarah froze, realizing her cover was blown completely. Marcus remained trapped in the hold, confusion replacing arrogance on his reddening face. The room held its collective breath, waiting for the revelation they sensed coming. "Sarah Chen," Nakamura continued, each word a nail in the coffin of her anonymity. "Three-time women's MMA champion, the ghost of the octagon." Sarah released Marcus instantly, stepping back as if burned. The name hung in the air like a specter, the ghost of the octagon. Students' phones captured Marcus staggering to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and disbelief. The hierarchy that had seemed so solid moments ago was crumbling like ancient stone. "That's impossible," Marcus sputtered, rubbing his arm. She retired 5 years ago," Nakamura interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of recognition. "After the accident." Sarah's eyes filled with tears she'd held back for half a decade. The old pain was resurfacing, clawing its way up from depths she'd thought permanently sealed. Students processed the impossible. They'd been training alongside a legend, mocking a champion, dismissing greatness as mediocrity. The female students stared with newfound awe. Jake remained on the mat, his pride as shattered as his assumptions. Marcus's followers began edging away from him, loyalty wavering in the face of this revelation. Sarah backed toward the exit, overwhelmed by the weight of recognition. "I came here to forget," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "not to remember." The door closed behind her with finality, leaving stunned silence in her wake. But silence never lasts in the age of social media. Within minutes, videos were uploading, texts were flying, and the legend of the ghost was spreading like wildfire through the mixed martial arts community. Sarah sat in her car in the parking lot, hands trembling against the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed incessantly, 47 missed calls and climbing. Then Emma's name appeared on the screen, and reality crashed back. "Mom, you forgot to pick me up from school again." The words hit harder than any punch Jake had thrown. Sarah realized she couldn't run from this anymore. The past had found her, and now she had to face it, for Emma's sake, if not her own. She turned the car around and drove back to the dojo. The students were still gathered in hushed clusters when she returned. Nakamura had dismissed the general class but kept the core group, those who needed to understand what they had witnessed. Marcus sulked in the corner, nursing both his bruised arm and his shattered ego. Sarah entered quietly, assuming the traditional seiza position with a grace that now made sense. "Class," Nakamura announced formally, "meet Sarah Ghost Chen, 3-time world champion, 23 wins, 2 losses, the youngest champion in her division's history." He moved to the wall of champions, revealing the photograph that had been deliberately obscured. The woman in the image was Sarah, but transformed, muscular, confident, holding championship belts in both hands with the kind of smile that came from knowing you were untouchable. The contrast with the woman sitting before them was jarring. 5 years ago, Sarah Chen wasn't just unstoppable, Nakamura continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. She revolutionized women's mixed martial arts. The Chen lock that you just witnessed, she invented it. The technique is named after her because no one else could execute it with that precision. He produced a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. The headline read, "Ghost Chen defends title in dominant fashion." Below, action shots showed Sarah in her prime, a force of nature contained in human form. Then came the night that changed everything. The room grew heavier with each word. Nakamura's voice dropped as he recounted the tragedy. A celebration after her 3rd title defense, rain-slicked roads, a drunk driver running a red light. David Chen, her husband and training partner, killed on impact. Sarah pulled from the wreckage with injuries that should have ended any athletic career. Crushed ribs, fractured spine, both arms broken in multiple places. "The doctors said she'd never fight again," Nakamura said softly. But the physical injuries were nothing compared to the rest. Their daughter Emma, only 3 years old, suffered traumatic brain injury. She spent 6 months in the hospital. Sarah's tears flowed freely now, no longer hiding behind the facade of the suburban mom. The students listened in rapt silence, understanding dawning about the depth of pain she'd been carrying. "She didn't retire," Nakamura clarified. "She vanished, overnight. Refused all interviews, turned down millions in endorsement deals, rejected every comeback offer. The mixed martial arts world lost its brightest star, and no one knew why, until today." Marcus, still nursing his wounded pride, couldn't help himself. "If she's so great, why is she hiding here with beginners?" Nakamura's gaze could have cut steel. because a true warrior chooses when to fight, and more importantly, chooses when not to. The other students had already begun distancing themselves from Marcus, his phone buzzing with notifications as videos of his defeat went viral. His attempt to maintain authority was crumbling in real time. Sarah finally spoke, her voice carrying the weight of years of silence. "I came here because Emma asked me to be strong again. She said she wanted a mommy who wasn't sad all the time." Her voice cracked. "But I was afraid if I fought, if I let myself feel that power again, I'd remember what I lost. David used to say I was beautiful when I fought, that I moved like poetry, struck like thunder. Now fighting just reminds me that he's gone." She rolled up her sleeves, revealing surgical scars that crisscrossed her forearms like a roadmap of trauma. Titanium plates in both arms, 3 surgeries to repair the nerve damage. They said I was done, that I'd be lucky to have full mobility. But the physical pain was nothing. It's the empty bed, the silent car rides, the space where he should be that never heals. Nakamura pulled up a documentary on his phone, showing highlights from Sarah's career. The students watched in awe as a younger Sarah demonstrated techniques that seemed to defy physics. Her nickname, the Ghost, came from her ability to disappear from an opponent's range and reappear where they least expected. She moved like smoke, struck like a sledgehammer, and grappled with the inevitability of gravity itself. She never lost by knockout, Nakamura noted. Only 2 decision losses in her entire career, both controversial. Most opponents were finished within 2 rounds. The UFC wanted her as the face of women's fighting. She was scheduled for their Hall of Fame. She never showed up to the ceremony. Marcus made one last desperate attempt to salvage his position. "Past glory doesn't matter, she's washed up now. That was all luck and muscle memory." The room turned on him with collective disgust. Even his most loyal followers couldn't support such obvious delusion. Sarah stood slowly, something shifting in her eyes. Not anger, but resolution. "You want proof?" she asked quietly. She moved to the heavy bag without warming up, without preparation. The first strike echoed through the dojo like a gunshot. What followed was a symphony of violence, combinations flowing like water, each strike perfect in placement and power. The bag swung wildly, its chain groaning under the assault. She finished with her signature technique, a spinning back elbow that would have ended any fight. When she turned back to face the class, her breathing was controlled, her eyes clear for the first time since she'd entered the dojo months ago. Jake approached with humility, bowing deeply. "I'm sorry, Sensei," he said, using the honorific without thinking. The female students looked at her with new eyes, not as a curiosity or an easy target, but as an inspiration. Marcus stood alone, isolated by his own arrogance and inability to recognize greatness when it stood before him. "This is what mastery looks like," Nakamura announced. "Not just technique, but restraint. She could have ended any of you in seconds. She chose mercy. That's the difference between a fighter and a warrior." Sarah's voice was steady now, the tremor gone. "I didn't lose my edge. I lost my reason to use it. But watching you," she looked directly at Marcus, "disrespect this art, mock those you see as weak, turn this sacred space into a playground for bullies, that's something I can't ignore. My husband died believing martial arts builds character. I won't let his memory be mocked by those who confuse strength with cruelty." Marcus made his final, fatal mistake. "Well, your dead husband isn't here to see." The temperature in the room plummeted. Sarah's eyes went from warm brown to Arctic ice in an instant. Something primal awakened in her expression, and every person in the room felt their primitive brains scream a warning. "You want to see the ghost?" Her voice was different now, carrying an edge that could draw blood. "Step up." Nakamura moved to mark the traditional challenge circle, understanding this needed to happen. Sarah bowed to David's memory, her lips moving in a silent promise. Marcus entered the circle with his usual bravado, but something in his eyes suggested he was beginning to understand the magnitude of his error. "Some lessons," Sarah said, assuming her fighting stance with terrible grace, "can only be learned the hard way." Her transformation was complete. The grieving widow was gone. The soccer mom had evaporated. In their place stood a predator who'd been caged too long, whose muscle memory sang hymns of violence. The ghost had returned to haunt the living. The traditional challenge mat was cleared with reverence, students forming a perfect circle around the sacred space. Marcus stripped to his tank top, muscles rippling as he flexed for his remaining supporters, though their enthusiasm had dimmed to uncomfortable obligation. Sarah removed her shoes with deliberate care, then her wedding ring, kissing it softly before setting it aside. The gesture carried more threat than any trash talk could have managed. Nakamoto stepped forward as officiant, his voice formal and final. "This ends when one submits or I call stop. Honor the art, honor yourselves." Marcus charged immediately, trying to use his size advantage to overwhelm her before she could settle into rhythm. It was like trying to grab smoke. Sarah circled calmly, reading his movements with the kind of clarity that comes from facing hundreds of opponents. His strikes were powerful, yes, but telegraphed with the obviousness of a billboard advertisement. She slipped each one with minimal effort, making him look not just clumsy but comically inadequate. The ghost emerged fully then. Her footwork became something beyond human, beyond what physics should allow. She appeared and disappeared from striking range like her nickname made manifest, leaving Marcus swinging at after-images while the real Sarah materialized where he least expected. His growing frustration was visible in the reddening of his face, the wildness creeping into his technique. Jake whispered to another student, "She's not even trying." He was right. This wasn't a fight. It was a systematic dismantling, a masterclass disguised as combat. Sarah landed single jabs with surgical precision, each one placed to demonstrate that she could end this whenever she chose. No combinations, no finishing moves, just individual strikes that carried messages. "I could have knocked you out there. That opening would have ended you. Your guard has more holes than Swiss cheese." The psychological warfare was more devastating than any physical damage. Marcus realized with growing horror that he was being toyed with, that this woman he'd dismissed as a soccer mom was operating on a level so far above him it was like a grandmaster playing chess with a child who'd just learned how the pieces moved. His confidence crumbled with each missed strike, each perfectly timed evasion. The crowd watched in awed silence, their phones capturing history in real time. The female student stood taller, seeing pure technique demonstrated without ego or cruelty. Marcus's remaining supporters stopped cheering, their loyalty evaporating like morning dew under harsh sunlight. "Stop playing with me," Marcus roared, throwing a wild haymaker born of desperation. Sarah ducked with liquid grace, and for the first time she spoke during the exchange. "I'm not playing, I'm teaching." The words preceded her shift to offense. What followed was poetry written in violence, a combination that flowed like water over stone. Jab, cross, hook, each landing with the precision of a metronome, followed by a takedown so smooth it looked choreographed. Marcus hit the mat hard, the sound echoing through the dojo like a judge's gavel. The ground game that followed was a masterclass in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Sarah transitioned to mount position with the inevitability of gravity, flowing with Marcus's desperate attempts to buck her off like a surfer riding waves. His strength advantage meant nothing when she moved with his force rather than against it. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Sarah began setting up the Chen lock, her signature submission that had ended careers and defined an era. Students recognized the positioning from earlier, but seeing it applied with full intention was like watching Da Vinci paint after only seeing sketches. Marcus's face went from red to purple as he realized the hopelessness of his position. Every escape attempt only tightened the hold, every movement calculated and countered before he could complete it. Sarah's control was absolute, her pressure measured to teach rather than injure. "Tap or sleep," she whispered, her voice carrying no emotion, just fact. His pride warred with survival instinct for long seconds. The room held its breath, watching a man's ego battle with reality. Finally, frantically, he tapped the mat. Sarah released immediately, flowing to her feet with the same grace she'd shown throughout. She offered him a hand up. Respect for a defeated opponent. the way of warriors. He refused, rolling away in shame, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The videos were already uploading, his humiliation preserved in digital amber for eternity. His authority in the dojo hadn't just been challenged, it had been obliterated. Sarah stood in the center of the mat, no longer hiding, no longer running. Her breathing was controlled, her posture straight, and for the first time in 5 years, she looked complete. The broken widow had been replaced by something whole, something that honored rather than betrayed her past. "I remember now," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent dojo. "I remember who I was." The students hung on every word as she addressed them directly. Strength isn't about domination. It's not about proving you're better than someone else. It's about protecting what matters. My husband taught me that before he died. Every technique, every moment of training, it all comes down to one question. Are you using your power to build or to break? Marcus sat alone in the corner, scrolling through his phone as notification after notification announced his viral humiliation. His former followers had already begun gravitating towards Sarah, drawn by the authentic strength she represented. His reputation, built on intimidation and false superiority, was dissolving in real time. "You think you're better than everyone," he lashed out, desperation making him reckless. Sarah's response was calm, carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I think I'm better than I was yesterday. That's all any of us can hope for." Even Marcus couldn't argue with that truth, and his silence spoke volumes. The ripple effects were immediate and profound. Female enrollment inquiries flooded in over the following days. The dojo's atmosphere transformed from one of hierarchy, based on intimidation, to one of mutual respect and growth. Students who had cowered now trained with renewed confidence. The bullying that had been tacitly endorsed evaporated like shadows exposed to light. Sarah began assisting with classes, her technique breakdowns drawing crowds of eager students. She found something she'd thought lost forever. Purpose beyond grief, meaning beyond pain. Teaching became her new canvas, and she painted masterpieces of understanding in the minds of those ready to learn. Marcus made one last attempt to undermine her, complaining to Nakamura about safety concerns and showboating. The senior instructor's response was swift and final. "A true teacher learns from all sources," Nakamura said. "Your inability to recognize mastery when it stands before you speaks to your limitations, not hers." The final humiliation came as newer students began seeking Sarah's guidance over his, as his advanced class requested her demonstrations, as parents specifically asked if their children could train with the champion. His relevance diminished daily, his classes shrinking while hers grew. Sarah found healing in the movement, peace in the teaching. She began wearing her wedding ring during training, no longer seeing it as a weight, but as a connection. David's memory lived in every technique she passed on, every student she helped discover their own strength. Fighting didn't take David away, she realized aloud one evening. Hiding did. He'd want me to honor our art, not abandon it. The transformation was complete. Sarah led warm-ups with natural authority. Marcus was relegated to teaching basic stances to beginners, his fall from grace absolute. The dojo's culture had shifted from one that celebrated dominance to one that honored growth, from intimidation to inspiration. Nakamura formally offered her the assistant instructor position, recognizing what the students already knew. She wasn't just a champion fighter, but a champion teacher. Her photo was added to the Wall of Honor, not just for her competitive achievements, but for her impact on every student she touched. The symbolic victory was Marcus standing before that wall, his own achievements rendered hollow by comparison. He finally understood the difference between a champion and a bully, between strength and cruelty, between fear and respect. The lesson had been taught the hard way, just as Sarah had promised. Standing before the mirror after class, Sarah saw herself clearly for the first time in years. Not the broken widow, not the hidden legend, but simply a woman who had remembered her strength and chosen to share it rather than hide it. "Tomorrow," she said softly, thinking of Emma, "I teach you the chin lock, but first, I'll teach you why we fight." 3 months had passed since the day Sarah Chen's ghost returned to haunt Thunder Mountain Traditional Martial Arts Academy. The morning sun filtered through windows as she unlocked the dojo with her own key, arriving early to prepare for the day's lessons. Students naturally gravitated toward her, forming semicircles of eager learners, while Marcus Williams had become little more than background noise, barely acknowledged by those who once hung on his every word. Her teaching style had transformed the space, firm but nurturing, demanding excellence while building confidence. The dojo's membership had doubled, with female enrollment reaching 60%. Women who had once been curiosities in the martial arts world now trained with the confidence of warriors, inspired by living proof that strength came in many forms. The black sedan that pulled up during evening class didn't initially draw attention, but when Dana Mitchell stepped out, his expensive suit and confident stride marking him as someone important, whispers rippled through the room. Students recognized him immediately, the Ultimate Fighting Championship's most successful talent scout, the man who had discovered half the current champions. Sarah continued teaching, deliberately ignoring the distraction. Her students needed to learn that focus couldn't be broken by external pressures, that true discipline meant completing your task regardless of who was watching. But she felt his eyes on her, evaluating, calculating, seeing dollar signs where she saw only peace. After class, as students filed out with excited chatter about the unexpected visitor, Mitchell approached with the smooth confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. "Sarah," he said, his smile practiced and perfect. "We need to talk." She continued cleaning the mats, not looking up. "I'm retired, Dana, you know that." "The world disagrees." He pulled out his phone, showing her the statistics. "Your videos have 50 million views. The hashtag Ghost Returns is trending worldwide. People want to see you fight again. People want a lot of things they can't have." Mitchell's smile widened. He'd negotiated with reluctant fighters before. "The UFC wants you for a comeback fight. Guaranteed title shot against the current champion. The purse?" He paused for effect. $2 million. One fight. Set yourself and Emma up for life." Sarah finally looked up, her eyes steady. "I'm not that person anymore. The Ghost versus Rebecca, the Reaper Santos. It would be the biggest fight in women's mixed martial arts history. Think about it. You could prove you're still the greatest who ever lived." He set a contract on the bench and walked away, his parting words calculated for maximum impact. "Think about Emma's future. The best schools, the best doctors, the best everything. One fight, Sarah. That's all." The empty dojo felt heavier after he left. Sarah stared at the contract, its numbers representing more money than she'd seen in a lifetime of teaching. Emma could have everything: the specialized therapy for her lingering cognitive issues, college without loans, a house without mortgage payments hanging over their heads. Nakamura found her sitting in meditation position, the contract unopened beside her. "The choice is yours alone," he said softly, settling beside her. "What would David want?" she asked, the question that haunted every major decision. "I'd want you to do what makes you whole. The question is, do you know what that is anymore?" She didn't answer because she couldn't. The fighter in her wanted to prove she was still the best. The mother wanted to secure Emma's future. The widow wanted to honor David's memory. The teacher had found peace. How could she reconcile all these pieces of herself? The next morning brought unexpected drama. Marcus, in a desperate bid to regain relevance, had contacted a local mixed martial arts blog. The article was inflammatory, designed to generate clicks. Has-been champion hides behind students, former instructor challenges Ghost to prove herself. Marcus had claimed Sarah was washed up and living in past glory, challenging her to a public match to prove she deserved the respect she received. The blog post went viral within hours, bringing unwanted attention to the dojo. Students arrived angry, having read Marcus's betrayal online. Nakamura confronted him in front of everyone. "You dishonor this dojo," the old master said, his voice cold with disappointment. "You dishonor yourself." Marcus tried to justify his actions. I built this place before she showed up. I deserve— Then you can build somewhere else, Nakamura interrupted. You're no longer welcome here. A teacher who cannot learn has nothing to offer students. The banishment was swift and absolute. Marcus left in disgrace, but the damage was done. Media requests flooded in, cameras appeared outside, and the quiet sanctuary Sarah had found was under siege. Local fighters arrived to show support, but their presence only added to the circus atmosphere. Emma asked the question that broke Sarah's heart. Mom, why are people being mean to you? Sarah realized she couldn't hide anymore. Running from the spotlight only let others define her narrative. Sometimes the only way out was through. She called a press conference for the next day. The dojo was packed with media, students, and community members. Marcus lurked in the back, hoping for vindication. Sarah entered in a simple gi, no makeup or pretense, and sat in traditional seiza position before the crowd. I'm Sarah Chen, she began, her voice calm and clear. I was a fighter. Now I'm a teacher. Marcus Williams challenged my credibility, suggested I need to prove myself. She paused, letting the tension build. I accept. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Marcus straightened, a smirk beginning to form. But Sarah wasn't finished. But not the way he expects. Marcus, you want to prove you're a better instructor? Then let's teach. You have 10 minutes to teach this room the Chen lock. I'll do it in 5. The students will vote on who did better. The challenge was brilliant in its simplicity. Marcus had been outmaneuvered completely. He couldn't back down without losing face, but he also couldn't possibly teach a technique he'd only experienced from the receiving end. His demonstration was a disaster. He fumbled through explanations, confused students with contradictory instructions, and grew increasingly flustered as people gave up trying to follow along. His 10 minutes felt like an hour of awkward incompetence. Sarah's demonstration was masterful. She broke the complex technique into simple components, used clear analogies, and had every student successfully executing the basics within her 5-minute window. The vote wasn't even close. Unanimous support for Sarah. Marcus slunk out, finally and completely defeated. Sarah addressed the remaining crowd. Teaching isn't about proving you're better than someone else. It's about making everyone else better. That's what we do here. Dana Mitchell approached after the crowd dispersed. Still want that comeback fight? Sarah looked around at her students, at the dojo that had become her second home, at Emma watching from the doorway with pride in her eyes. I already have everything I need to fight for, she said, but I'll make you a counteroffer. I'll train your next female champion. The ghost may be retired, but her legacy isn't. Mitchell's smile was genuine this time. Deal. When do we start? We already have, Sarah said, gesturing to the young women training with newfound confidence. The transformation was complete. Sarah was officially named head instructor, and the dojo was renamed Ghost Academy. Students wore their academy badges with pride, understanding they trained under a legend who had chosen teaching over glory. Emma began training seriously, showing natural aptitude and her mother's discipline. Female fighters from across the state made pilgrimages to train with Sarah. Her teaching videos went viral for the right reasons: clear instruction, respectful methodology, and visible results. Weeks later, Marcus returned, humbled and broken. I was wrong, he admitted, the words clearly painful. Could you teach me? Sarah considered for a long moment, then nodded. Everyone deserves a second chance, but respect is earned daily, not demanded. The Wall of Champions was reorganized, with Sarah's photo at center position. The plaque below read simply, Champions are made, not born. Sarah Chen, instructor. Evening meditation had become a sacred tradition. Sarah led the practice, students reflecting on the day's lessons. No speeches or grand gestures were needed. Her presence alone transformed the space from a place of combat to a place of growth. As the last student left, Sarah stood alone in the dojo she had once entered as a broken woman seeking invisibility. She bowed to David's photo on the wall, her wedding ring catching the light. I kept my promise, she whispered. I stayed strong. The radio played softly as she drove home. Emma asleep in the back seat after her own training session. The news mentioned Ghost Academy producing another tournament champion. Sarah smiled and turned off the radio. We already knew that, she said to the sleeping city. Some legends retire to live in peace. Others find new ways to be legendary. Sarah Chen had discovered that the greatest victory wasn't in the cage or the ring. It was in the eyes of a student finally understanding that true strength wasn't about winning fights. It was about winning the battle with yourself. The ghost had finally found her home, not in victory or fame, but in the quiet moments when a student understood that strength without character was just violence in disguise. And in teaching that lesson, Sarah Chen had become more than a champion. She had become immortal.
Mình biết rằng có nhiều bạn nam đang theo dõi series này. Mình là Daisy và mình tin rằng hiểu được câu chuyện của người phụ nữ sẽ giúp chúng ta trở thành một người đàn ông tốt hơn. A Simple Woman, subscribe để khám phá nội tâm phong phú này nhé.